thank our speakers for coming. In my eyes, they are 4 heroes, and I'm thrilled that we're able to document their stories today. And I'm also just proud to know them, and what you're about to hear is not easy to hear, and it's not easy to live through again. And for them to do that is their gift to us, so that we all remember. So right now, Tyler Ferguson is going to come up and introduce our first speaker.
Mr. Stanley Morganstern was a sergeant in the Army during World War II. After the war, he was in the importing business and now enjoys travel, giving tours, and docenting at the Temple and Museum.
Also thank you. Dedicated to killing all the gypsies, all the homosexuals, anybody with a physical handicap, a mental handicap, a political handicap as far as they were concerned. But they were having a real problem because they still had 6 or 8 million people to kill, and they weren't able to do it fast enough. So in typical German, efficient fashion, hopefully people would come and help them get good ideas on how to do this. I'm only looking at my watch so I don't run over where I'm supposed to go. They held this conference, and everybody came in the morning, had a cup of coffee and a piece of Danish, and sat down to attack this problem. How do you murder 6 or 8 million people more efficiently? And then, of course, the secondary problem, how do you get rid of the human garbage? Not easy, big problem. They got many suggestions, but one of the suggestions that they got caused the formation of groups called the Einsatzgruppen. These were small army groups, somewhat smaller than an army corps. And there were 4 groups, and each one of these groups was to follow a German army as it was driving east into Russia. And the farther the army went, these other soldiers then followed behind, and their job was not to fight the enemy. Their job was simply to find and kill as quickly as possible any of the people that fit into any of the categories that didn't fit the exact Aryan description of what a human being ought to be. So how do you get nice, and I think in most cases God-fearing, intelligent, music appreciating people? How do you get them to go into such a group and go ahead and obey their orders and go on with what they were sent there to do? One of the best ways of carrying out their mission, of course, was to find a church, herd as many people into the church as you could, and set it on fire. Very efficient, solves both problems at the same time. How do you do that? How do you get them to do it? Why wouldn't they rebel? Well, the first thing you do is to make the people that you are liquidating less than human. You dehumanize them. You say that they are wrong because they're the different color, they're a different religion. Whatever they are, they're different than you are, and they are subhuman. If you keep that up long enough, and if you teach it to your children long enough, than killing a human being. No more problem than to step out a bug that's going across your living room floor. Because you're not killing people. Therefore, you are a moral human being. What we're talking about here is not history. Not at all. We're talking about current events. Everybody heard the word Darfur? How many of us, I don't want a show of hands, how many of us did anything about it? Now, I realize we can't all get in a plane and go over there and join the fighting. Did we go to lectures to hear about it? Did we try to affect our congressman? Did we send $10 to the Darfur fund, whatever it might have been? Did we do anything? Did we protest? It's not enough just not to use the N-word or not to call people by racial or countries' names. We also have to stand up and be counted when things like this happen. If you hear somebody calling somebody else a this, that, or the other thing, it's not enough that you didn't do it. What is required of you is, as a decent human being who was fortunate enough to be born in this time and place, to tell that person, not confrontationally, but to tell that person, that's not good, that's not allowed, that's not what I want to hear. If that continues, I'm out of here if that's what's going on. That's not the way people act. Because until they stop acting that way, these same things will happen over and over and over. Who won World War II? I don't know yet. Many people think they know. I don't know. I won't know until I see how all of us act, till I see how our children and grandchildren act, how we treat each other, what kind of respect we have for each other. When we stop worrying about whose father or grandfather or great-grandfather came from where and how, till all those things are a part of our very being so we don't even have to think about them. When that all comes about, if we get the right answer to all of those, then we, the Allies, the good guys, as I put it, will have won that war. But until then, the jury's still out. Thank you for listening.
Gladys and Jerry Loth. Both Gladys and Jerry were born on the island of Java, part of the former Dutch East Indies, now the Republic of Indonesia. From the early 1200s, some of the islands were famous for being the Spice Islands, after precious products sought after by the Europeans. First the Portuguese, then the Spaniards, and finally the Dutch who stayed in those islands from the 17th through the middle of the 20th century. With the Industrial Revolution taking place during the 18th, 19th centuries, other highly desired natural and mineral sources were found in the various islands, such as iron ore, silver, gold, and finally, oil. This is why Japan joined Germany during World War II and within a short time defeated the Allies and occupied the islands in 1942. This is what happened to our guests.
I'm delighted indeed to have the opportunity to tell a little bit about my wife and myself in the context of music. Because what I have experienced in my long decades of life is that music somehow has a softening influence on all of us, and that includes not only us, who a little bit suffered, but also quite often on the enemies, quote unquote, whoever the enemy is. So in that respect, I I'm grateful for Mary Kay for doing this in this context. But as far as where we were born and brought up, believe me, it's 12,000 miles from here, 20 hours flying without a delay, so it is a long way. But one thing is true, it is always warm there, so we have no snow, at least not except for in the mountains. We don't suffer as far as that's concerned, but we suffer other things. And that was my assignment to tell a little bit about it. I was 12 years when the war in the Pacific started. That was four months after Pearl Harbor, when Pearl Harbor was attacked. And it took only 4 months for the enemy, for Japan, to went all the way to the southern part of Asia to what is nowadays Indonesia. So the Japanese troops came in on March of 1942. We lived at that time in Surabaya, which is the main city in the island of Java. And my father, as was the case with all Dutch citizens, was immediately drafted in the Dutch army. And from there on, his next resort area was in the camp, which was later on called and made famous or infamous on the bridge on the river Kwai, which you remember is all the way up Thailand. That movie, incidentally, is totally wrong, totally wrong. I heard it from the first case from my own father, who was there. But the situation became more known in the United States, the bridge on the river Kwai. So he was imprisoned in May of 1942, and we didn't see him back until 6 years thereafter. The Dutch women, children, older people, older men who were left there were all herded together in compounds, blocks of houses, smaller and smaller and smaller. The food markets were all taboo for us. We were not allowed to go outside and buy food, fruit or whatever it is. All the Dutch schools were closed for us. All the hospitals were closed for the Dutch or Dutch descent people. So it was not a present time, is it? And we were hungry. I don't know how, not better to say that. We were hungry. I was growing up 12, 13, 14 years. And for those of you who have raised children of that age, you know hunger for a teenager means a lot. It means a lot of food, a lot of milk, and what have you, that we, of course, didn't have. But the older boys, and that included myself, became very efficient in sneaking out of those, quote, camps and sort of trying to smuggle food in or trade it in for what our parents had left behind. And if you were caught, you were not pleasantly treated, of course. And my 2 kneecaps were broken by the Japanese when I was caught. It was sort of stupid. I didn't bow deep enough. But other than that, that was the situation. We were truly hungry. And all we were trying to do is listening to the radio. The radios were all sealed off by the Japanese. So we were officially not be able to listen to foreign radio, but one of my good friends had a knack for it. He managed to fix it in such a way that we could listen. And for those of you who are from the New York State area, all we remember that it came from a place in New York that we didn't know how to pronounce. It was called Schenectady. And said, Schenectady, what's it? You know about New York and Chicago, but Schenectady, but that's where the broadcast came from. So that was the situation then. And then after Indonesia stood up, after Japan had surrendered, Indonesia stood up, they imprisoned us again. We had just been liberated. We could get out of the compounds. And then the Indonesian rebels, we called them, and now, of course, they were the freedom fighters, the independence fighters. But they imprisoned us again, differently. Now, the man, I was 17, at that time 18, we were separate from the women and the children. And that was not present either. Food was usually not abundant. And for some of the young boys and girls, I remember that at one time we were imprisoned in a church, the Protestant church, with high windows like this. The birds came flying through that, and we stupid boys tried to catch them. And some of us were sort of agile, and we managed to catch a couple of those birds, and we ate them raw. Now, if you can imagine, a little bird has very little food or meat in it, but boy, did it taste well at that time. At other camps that we were, we managed to catch snakes. And for the heck of it, I don't know, but we ate snakes, and it tasted wonderful at that time. But all in all, we were liberated by the Allied troops in 47, 48, island by island, city by city. And we were exchanged. We were sort of prisoner of war exchanged. And that's when I saw my father again, 6 years after he was imprisoned. I had not seen my mother and my brothers and children, brothers and sisters for, that was 2 years then. But we were all together. And from what I remember, the first thing we all said to each other, we want to go to school. And for some of you, it may be difficult to believe it. After all, I believed it either years thereafter, but going to school was something that one was hungry for. Some of you may have experienced it. If you don't have a chance to learn, whatever it is, you miss something in your life. And if there's one thing that we want to tell the children and the grandchildren that we have, learn as much and as long as you can. So that's in a nutshell what my experiences were. My wife will tell you a little bit more of what she experienced at that time, because she was also in Surabaya, but was treated differently, of course. Gladys, it's your turn.
I think all war survivors, wherever they are in prison, are so blessed that we are here now, and will agree that we are blessed that we survived and are here now in this country. I was 8 years when Japanese troops landed in Sumatra, the big oil rich island where my father was a railroad engineer, but was called to Java to see and be close to the shore so we can sail to Java. But before he could do that, he had to do one assignment: to destroy every bridge that we crossed on our way to the nearest port, to delay the marching up of the Japanese troops. I remember that trip by truck like yesterday. Okay. Okay, that's okay. I was sitting in a truck with my mother, my 10-month-old brother, and my 5-year-old sister. I could smell the burning houses, hear the noise of falling bridges, and felt the fear that the Japanese troops would catch up with us. My father also ended up in a POW camp in Japan. after his ship was torpedoed by the Japanese. He was a prisoner of war for 5 long years. In the meantime, our family also ended up in prison compounds together with my grandmother, 6 aunts and their children, 8 in total, in one small house with 2 bedrooms. I remember that when my girls, my age, wanted to play outside the house, we were told to look as dirty, unkempt, and unattractive as possible. That's a difference than now. We want to be as attractive as possible. And my aunts and my mother did the same. Every so often, Japanese men tried to break in the houses, pretending that they were looking for criminals whom they wanted to protect. That was how one of my aunts eventually was beaten to death because she refused to accompany one Japanese. The protection camps of the Indonesian in general were not much better than the Japanese. When we were liberated by the Allied troops in 1945, we were looking like skeletons. We were sick, close to starvation and exhausted. Several of us never really recovered mentally and physically. We still have something with us, and we carry those feelings and those thoughts and those memories with us all our life. But the young among us had one desire, as my husband already said, to go to school. We did not have school for 5 years. We had no health care and no calcium and nothing of the other pills that we are taking now. We had so-called bridge schools where teachers themselves, fresh out of prison camps, taught us as well, young, idealistic teachers fresh from school. The Catholic Church sent dozens of teachers, nuns, and also physicians, and all of that while there was still shooting in the streets. And now we are here, far away, some 12,000 miles from where we were born. But we are proud to say, we made it to all of you students and other people, parents, that you have, your comforts, your school. Let's hope we will have peace someday everywhere. Thank you.
Mr. Roman Freeman was born in Sosnowiec, Poland in 1938. He was 18 months old when the Nazis attacked Poland. He was liberated by the Russian soldiers in 1945 and shortly thereafter moved to Germany. He lived in Germany until 1949, then moved to the United States. He received all his education in this country, graduated from Ohio State, and worked for the United States government for 45 years.
Thank you, Can you hear me? Thank you for inviting me. And that was a wonderful introduction. To say Sosnovitz is very difficult. If I might piggyback just a little bit on what Mr. Morgenstern was saying about the Wannsee Conference. The Wannsee Conference occurred on January 20, 1942. That's almost a year after we were at war. Sometimes when I give my talks, and people don't understand what I mean by this, I'm very grateful, and please take this for what it's worth, that Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Had it not been for Japan attacking Pearl Harbor, not only 6 million Jews would have perished, but probably 11 million, because that was the ultimate goal of Adolf Hitler. One of the reasons that they met at the Wannsee Conference, as Mr. Morgenstern told you, was the final solution to the Jewish problem. One of the problems was, how do we kill 11 million people? Because the bullets were expensive. So they had to figure out a way more quickly to kill the Jews. And that's when they began building the concentration camps. Auschwitz, Mauthausen, Sobibor, Treblinka. I visited all those in 1999. I've been back twice. When the war began, I was 18 months old, living in Sosnovitz. And within a year, when I was almost 2.5 or thereabouts, my mother, my father, and I were taken to Shredula, which was a ghetto right outside of the city limits. Barbed wire was put around the ghetto, and all the Jews from the surrounding communities were all brought into the ghetto. We lived in the ghetto for months, again, with a lack of food, because that was the ultimate aim of the Germans as well. Don't feed them, don't give them warm clothing, they will die of starvation, they will die from the cold, they will die from illness. When the ghetto that I lived in was more or less decimated, because the trains that they were loading the people on, taking them to Auschwitz, there were maybe about 100 people who were left. My mother, my father, and I, and by this time my brother, who was a year old, were one of those 100 or so people, and we were marched to a work camp. Now, those of you who might have read anything at all about the Holocaust know that old people and children were not wanted. The old people couldn't work, and of course the children couldn't either. So the Nazis found ways of starving and beating the old people and mutilating and killing the children. One of the things that I remember vividly, and people say, well, how can you remember that? You were just a child. But when you have a traumatic experience, you don't forget these experiences. I remember one time at Shredula, there was an elderly gray-haired lady sitting on a rain barrel. And a Nazi who probably had a family of his own, probably had a mother and a grandmother, without any feeling at all, took out his German Luger, walked up to the lady, put his Luger up to her head, and shot her. And I remember crying and running to my mother, telling her in Polish what I had seen, and she more or less said, no, you didn't see that, trying to protect me. I said, of course I saw it. And I took her by the hand, I took her to where the lady was lying in this puddle of blood, and I said, this is what I saw. I remember looking out a window where the boxcars were being loaded up with Jews. The German shepherds, the dogs were barking. The Germans were running around with their rifles, their Lugers, screaming, mach schnell, go fast, as they were loading up these boxcars. When we left Shredula, my parents didn't know what to do about me and my brother, and my mom told me they had a debate. Whom do we take? Now, according to Jewish tradition, you take your oldest child first. So they had to do something about my 1-year-old brother. My mom befriended someone, and he gave her some sleeping pills for my brother, thinking that my mom would let him sleep, or he would sleep for about 12 hours so that my father could come back and get him. And they would take me on this march to the camp. And I recall standing between my mom and my dad with a blanket around them so that the Nazis couldn't see me. And when I give my talk, I always say, we have to believe in miracles, because if we didn't believe in miracles, I wouldn't be here to tell you the story. Because it was a miracle that the Germans didn't see me, that I made it to this work camp where my mom hid me in a suitcase. She hung me on a wall in a potato sack. She would put me in a bed under some blankets, all to keep me out of sight of the Nazis. Now, we talk about the bad Polish people, the bad Nazis. All people are not bad. If it weren't for a Catholic Polish woman, Maria Balagova, I wouldn't be here to tell you my story. Because from the work camp, a German soldier took me in a suitcase to her home. And that's where I survived the war from 1942 to 1945. I didn't know anything about religion. I was a child. And Maria Balagova took me to church. And I remember vividly one Easter Sunday holding her hand, having my Easter basket in my other hand, and the priest blessing us and the eggs and holy water going in my eye. These are things that I remember because I was there. And when I went back to Poland in 1999, and I found the church in Sosnowiec where she had taken me, in the neighborhood where we lived, it was amazing because it was 50 years after the fact, and here I was on the steps of the church where Maria Balagova took me. We were liberated in 1945 by the Russians. And I remember the night that we were liberated, the bombs falling on Sosnowiec. As I said, these are things that you just don't forget. One of the comments, I don't want to run over my time. So basically what I want to say is, and this is for the young people here, and for you, what is very important is, for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. So whether it's Darfur, Rwanda, the genocides, it's when good people stand by and watch it happen. Thank you.